So the agriculture industry represents 1 trillion USD, with crop, mainly grains, taking up the biggest part. Grains are mainly corn, rice, and wheat, and they have specific areas in China where they are predominant, as you can see. 20% of the vegetables are grown in controlled environments like greenhouses. This is where we see industrialization starting. Orchards are mainly growing fruit such as typical oranges and apples, but you can also see the other main fruits and the respective provinces where they are predominant. Now, of the agriculture industry, 27% of the China labor in there has a relatively low education level. So the agriculture industry in China is actually representing more than a quarter of the population's labor force, but they're all low educated mainly. So next, I'm gonna move to which are the challenges that China agriculture industry is facing. Now, first of all, there actually is a shortage of grain, and it's actually getting tougher because the population is starting to eat more meat. Now, if all Chinese people would eat as much meat as we do, we would be in a big problem. Because China has a relatively low amount of arable land. It's one of the countries with the least amount of arable land compared to its population. And it actually even has decreased in the past years due to development, contamination, and also conversion to ecological use, like ecological parks. Now, the younger generation actually is less interested in the old farming practices because it's a very tough life to work in the farming industry. It is still a lot of small farm holders, which has a lot of tough labor conditions. Also, the habits of the old farmers, for example, on the amount of pesticides they use and how they apply it, they're hard to change. So there's still a lot of overuse of fertilizer, for example, and overuse of pesticides, and this is degrading the land quality. Not only that, China has relatively a low amount of water, and water scarcity is making good irrigation practices increasingly important. This is one of the key challenges China is facing as well. Now, to address all these, the government has made a move to change the smallholder farms to larger scale farms, as you can see here. But also, you see the numbers, the biggest amount of the agriculture industry is still in the hands of the smallholders. Now, let's have a look at how China is modernizing the agriculture industry. China is a central plan economy, as you know. It's a different system that we have in Belgium and in Europe. A plan economy basically means that every 5 years, they make an update on the progress of the last 5 years. And every 5 years, they set new priorities, depending on the country's needs. It's a very systematic, very consequent move forward into a specific direction. Now, the most recent shift, the most recent policy that is critical to understand where things are going is actually the digitization of the agriculture and rural area. It's a plan set for 2019 to 2025. Now, this initiative aims at building on technology, machinery, not only that, also digitization, Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, and so on. Now, the government started incentivizing getting larger and modern farms as a result of this. Also started incentivizing the e-commerce and innovation in general. Now, they also developed specific objectives for different parts of the country, not only to get certain outputs of certain crops, because this is how a planned economy works. The amount of crops in different parts of the country is actually planned, but also to incentivize specific research and innovation. And this is happening via modern agricultural parks, the maps. Now, these maps actually are key to understand how China's planned economy works, and also to understand how you, if you want to enter the China market, need or should or best enter this market via this ecosystem. Because you will see there is the local government, which is executing what the central plan economy is asking them to do. And they get all kinds of instruments for that to incentivize with tax and so on. The second pillar are the universities, where the research and development has happened. Also R&D centra, because again, these are doing research specifically for what the plan economy is asking them to do. And then finally, the industry, obviously, because again, also the industry, companies in China know what the plan economy is asking to do in the specific parts of the country is going to be what is going to be incentivized. And these incentives might not be always there in year one. They might go and come in year 2, in year 3, because whatever is needed to reach that goal after 5 years is going to happen. So it is a dynamic something where if you understand how the ecosystem works, you know you need to be part of it or figure out how to be an important part of it, because it's always going to be incentivized. Now, here you can also see the key stakeholders in China's agriculture ecosystem. You can see the three in the middle: the business, the government, and the farmers, the equipment providers, and so on. But here I want to make a specific point. So all these players, they are individual companies, but what the government now is systematically doing is to connect all these players by digitizing the whole value chain. So you can imagine state-owned enterprises, for example, fertilizer companies, or for example, very big farm companies, but also e-commerce, also R&D. All of these stakeholders are now going digital. They're all connected, state-owned enterprises, private companies, but also R&D centra, universities, and the service industry and the entrepreneurs are being incentivized to facilitate the growth, the progress in this ecosystem, in this value chain. Now, as you have seen, China has access to data in a very detailed way. You can see this with how COVID is being managed. In the same way, they have data on an enormous amount of things you can't even imagine. But this data is now being centralized and is being made available for players into this industrial value chain. So this is big data. In addition to that, artificial intelligence is being invested. So the players in this value chain, they get access to big data with AI to then figure out how to optimize processes, solutions, cooperation models, and so on. So you can imagine how this is accelerating over the next couple of years. And it's also important to realize this is not only for the agriculture industry. This digitization of the industrial value chain actually is happening in all the industries. This is part of China's 2025 manufacturing plan. So here you can see how it works when the central plan economy starts rolling out. In the meanwhile, there are already these maps in 31 provinces. Now, if you want to enter the market, you need to understand the KPIs of these maps, because what is what they need to do. So, of course, these maps, they need to still target GDP. But as you have seen in the recent two sessions, GDP is set relatively low because they don't want to put pressure. But at the same time, there's still a target. Now, a second KPI of the maps is basically talents and the ability to generate patents, and also the ability for them to create more companies. Now, it's good to know that these maps not necessarily want your IP. They are more interested in the leverage they can get from you to grow the foundation of this ecosystem. This is why solutions that can facilitate or catalyze the interactions between the other stakeholders to accelerate the growth of the ecosystem are actually the most attractive to them. So the key in this is how your solutions serve the localized KPI of the central plan economy, as you can see here. Now, due to the potentially disruptive nature of digital farming solutions, those digital farming solutions are actually the most interesting for China at this moment. This is also where you see most support and most empowerment. And this slide also shows you why. Because digital farming solutions can increase operational efficiency, they can reduce labor requirements, improve environmental performance, reduce the cost, ensure the food security, and also make the industry attractive to young people and entrepreneurs. And you can see all these items that I just mentioned are totally in line with what the government tries to achieve. Now, also the financial industry is very active in the agriculture industry today with financing and insurances and e-commerce. Especially e-commerce has made huge investments, and this was triggered by COVID in February last year, but in the meanwhile is skyrocketing. So with some platforms such as, for example, Pinduoduo, already pledging to sell 145 billion worth of farm produce annually by 2025. Now, as you know, China has already rolled out the network that enables digital solutions to be used. Even in the countryside, it's enormous how much of that is available, so that even a farmer in the middle of nowhere, living in a way of, let's just say, 50 years ago, what we would say in Belgium, still has access to the most modern technology for selling the produce. You see very funny movies like local farmers selling their products. At the same time, you see now how they start using, for example, satellite via their phone to figure out when should I use which kind of fertilizer for my crop after I've taken a picture of my crop, because this picture has AI to analyze what my crop needs. And then the system actually helps them to understand what might be the price they can sell the crop on. So all these things, they are accelerating at an incredible speed. Now, I just want to summarize what I talked about today. That is that it's a large opportunity. It's really a central plan economy, which means that it's a very clear indication of where it's going, what is important. There is also a very specific model that actually is implementing this plan. There is also a very clear ecosystem with the maps that is executing this. As we mentioned before, there are 6 focus areas that are going to be very attractive to play in, especially if you have a disruptive impact. Digital farming in general is a key focus because of having that disruptive nature. And last but not least, I'm going to quickly touch on fintech. So you may have noticed that China has already been issuing a digital currency. They have adapted the green bond standards to kind of open it up for the international market. They're now actually having green financing incentives. Now, with the economy already ramping up, with COVID under control, with the opening of the market, you can see that the large investment companies like a Goldman Sachs, they see the opportunity. They already went in. And you also see they are very eagerly trying to figure out how to become part of this market, not only with investment in general, but also with fintech. Now, the most recent, very fascinating development I've seen in the agriculture industry is that there are now entrepreneurs in certain parts of the country beginning to use, how shall I say it, non-tradable funding, the NTF, tokenizing, blockchain solutions to conceptually combine a number of stakeholders in this ecosystem by means of smart contracting, where each of the player in a region gets a certain value in this ecosystem. For example, a farmer has a certain value because having a farm and land and being able to produce. An e-commerce company has a certain value because of being able to sell the produce. A harvester company has a certain amount of value. A startup company with a new solution has an amount of value. And in the blockchain context, all these players are put together in a basket. It's like eggs in a basket. And investors now are able to actually invest in the basket using fintech. So they don't need to invest in a specific startup or in a specific, for example, state-owned enterprise, if it even were possible, or a specific private company or whatever. They can actually invest in the solution as a whole, which reduces the risk and which makes it incredibly interesting to see how that's going to develop. Because once this rolls out, and whichever solution is successful actually always rolls out very quickly through the maps. If this rolls out, you're going to see a new market being created, which is low risk, but in agriculture, which is at this moment one of the attractive markets. So I would like to end with this final contemplation and go back to Gwen for the next speaker. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Johnny, for your very interesting presentation on China's innovation in the agricultural sector. It's really very impressive.